Well, thanks for having me, and thanks all of you for joining. I have a strange job that I never thought could exist, which is I draw comics that are based on scenes from my book. I had never drawn a comic until 2020. I took a comics drawing class during the pandemic. It was one of those, pandemic activities. Let me try something new. And I am a professional speaker. I lead workshops and give keynotes where I essentially walk through my comics and, depending on the topic, also have audience members draw and use that as a way to lower people's defenses and spark conversation on what can be complex, intense issues. So I thought I'd just go over a few quick slides with a little bit of the story behind the story and kind of how we got here. And then we'll open it up to mainly be questions and an informal conversation. That's my book, Beyond Leaning In. Published it a little over 2 years ago. My impetus to writing the book, it's a business book, but it's written as a novel. You can find copious footnotes in the back of the book, but it tells the story of a tech CEO. It happens to be a tech CEO. It really could be a leader of any kind of organization. And she has smashed all the glass ceiling. She has fought for women on her team, and she encounters this kind of mystery, which is she's trying to figure out why some of the women, millennials, the kind of younger generation X, who are advancing into leadership positions, are quitting at higher rates. They're less engaged in engagement surveys. And so she's sort of on this quest to try to investigate why is that. And the story goes back and forth between the perspective of different characters, men, women, different levels on the organizational chart, different ages. And it's really meant to give us a sense of why gender gaps still exist, why they're so hard to close even when we mean well. But for me, the story really began in 2013 when Sheryl Sandberg first published Lean In. And at first, I was really excited because I thought, okay, here's a book by a Facebook executive. It's talking about women in leadership. Everybody's talking about it. And then I became a little bit disappointed because I felt like even though in her book, Sheryl Sandberg says that, this is only one slice of the pie, I think we like sound bites as a society. We like easy solutions to things. And it felt like this became this easy soundbite that whenever any kind of challenge related to women in leadership, gender gaps came up in my workplace, and I started to just trade notes with friends in all kinds of industries and other workplaces, everyone would just say, well, lean in, lean in. That's the solution. That's the only solution, instead of looking at all the complicated challenges. I became a little obsessive. I just kept reading and reading and would find, of course, so many different studies about all of the challenges beyond leaning in. And I wondered, well, how do we get people to pay attention to these issues? There's so much research out there. It's wonderful. It's also dense. And at the end of a long workday, the last thing anybody maybe wants to do is read another business book. So I decided to write Beyond Leaning In as a novel. I had gotten my PhD in English before I entered the consulting world. And my hope was that a novel would be able to do things that a traditional business book wouldn't be able to, that it could help lower our guards on emotionally charged topics, but also have fun, that it could help us develop empathy for characters unlike us and make sense of our own experiences. I had read, some of you may be familiar with some of the books by Patrick Lencioni, who writes a lot of business fables, but they were usually from one or two characters' perspectives. And I wanted to be able to say, here's 6 or 7 characters. We can go back and forth, and that helps us understand issues. And then also to show the difference between intent and impact. That in this book, every single character means well. There's nobody who's overtly sexist. There's nobody who's out to get other women. It's really about the fact that even though everyone means well, we're still unintentionally getting in our way. I finished the book and started to draw comics. My inspiration for that partly was that I had taken the comics class because it was a pandemic and I needed something to do. And part of it was that a few years before that, I had read this wonderful book called Leading Transformation, and it tells the story of Lowe's, the hardware store. And the book is about how Lowe's in 2012 was really, kind of running hard to stay in second place to Home Depot. They were closing stores, layoffs, really struggling. And if you had asked any of the Lowe's executives at the time what was going on, they would have said that it was very hard for them to see the future, that they could kind of just focus on what was right in front of them, but they were struggling with any big ideas. So their board did something pretty bold. They had a neurobiologist on their team, and he was really interested in just how do you get people to think differently when they're not stuck. It was kind of what I was interested in with my book as well, this idea of, okay, if people are trying to contemplate any change, whether diversity, equity, inclusion, which is a lot of what I write about now, but strategic planning, anything bold, anything different, how do you get them to get past that fear? And what they ended up doing was hiring 5 science fiction writers, and they gave them all the data they had about customers and technology and market trends. The science fiction writers wrote stories about the future of Lowe's. They gave those to a comic book artist. The comic book artist drew this comic strip. You can see some of these clips here. And it's about a young couple that have this aging home. They love it. They love its history. They want to renovate it. They can't figure out how. And so in the comic book, they go into Lowe's and they put on the glasses, and then now they can see the room and the furnishings and all of that. And now they can communicate their vision to their contractor, and they could buy more stuff at Lowe's. They put this in front of the board, and within 5 years, Lowe's had pioneered working with Google on augmented reality. They had exoskeletons for employees to be able to stock heavy items. They had robots that could greet customers and do inventory at night. They were profiled in Fast Company and Inc. and Forbes and everywhere. And so this book is something that had just been kind of percolating in my mind for a while at the same time that I was writing this business book as a novel. And just thinking about how all these ideas were coming together of, okay, when people are stuck, how to use fiction. Dave mentioned at the time I was working for EAB, a company that does higher ed consulting, and I had just launched EAB's membership for university presidents. And they were asking for new ways of thinking about strategic planning. So I started to experiment there a little bit. My team created these little science fiction brochures of future universities. And we'd put them in front of presidents and pretend that we were in a time machine together. And it was interesting to me because I could see how that helped unlock a different part of the brain and helped people just begin to think differently. And that was one of my motivations in 2020. In the middle of the pandemic, I realized I was never going to finish my book while having a full-time job. So I left the job to finish the book, start drawing comics, and now to speak about them. And what I love doing is leading workshops about them, where I have participants draw as a way for them to think through new things. And this is one of my comics that I probably talk about the most and use as the basis for probably my most requested workshop. So on the left side, this is a scene from the book. There's a promotions memo. It congratulates 2 employees for the promotion to the same position. We're calling out Mike for his $5 million in revenues and his analytical skills. Mara has a fantastic work ethic and great baking skills. All of us have gained a few pounds from her cupcakes. The inspiration behind this promotion memo was actually a study I had read years ago that had really got me thinking since then, which was about letters of recommendation for undergraduates and how the recommendations for women students would more use words like hardworking, and that got a great person to be around, that really got to personality and got to hard work. And that letters of recommendation for men students, and these were profiles of students who had maybe similar grades, similar academic performance, were more likely to use superlative words like top 1%, top 3%, more likely to get at quote unquote hard skills. There's a lot of research around this related to performance reviews at any level. But I remember that initial study on letters of recommendation was what first got me very fascinated in these biases. At the bottom, I would show this individual saying, hey, what's the big deal? They both got promoted. And I use that as a way to talk about the fact that what can seem like a microaggression may be something that we don't pay attention to. If it's, I don't even like the word microaggression, because if it's micro, why do we care? Why does it matter? On the right side, these 2 individuals in the top right, this could be 2 weeks later, this could be 3 months later. Neither of them know anything about Mike or Mara. They've never met them. The person on the left, he's looking for project help. Maybe he goes to the employee directory. He's looking for an analytics manager. He sees Mike and Mara's name. He asks his colleague, "What do you know about Mike or Mara?" She says, "I heard Mike is great. I don't know much about Mara." And that's because people remember Mike for the revenues and Mara for the cupcakes. In my workshops, what people will do then is draw the next 4 panels. So you can kind of see the drawings here, but the idea is really this isn't about creating art. This is about drawing as a way to think differently and free our minds a bit. And people will draw as a way to reflect on what's the impact on Mara from this, what's the impact on other people within the organization. And then they start to draw solutions. And that's actually my favorite part because each of the drawings is only 3 or 4 minutes long. I set a timer, we're listening to music, goes quickly. But in that short amount of time, the 4 minutes that people spend on their solution comic, people come up with solutions to this problem that they hadn't come up with before. And that actually we can map them all out. So if I'm doing it with an entire group, we can map up all their solutions because everyone came up with a completely different solution. And you start to get at a whole system.
Very cool. I must say that when I first picked up Melanie's book, and I thought, oh well, I'm gonna talk to her about this book later, so I probably should read it. I mean, to be, but I got hooked, and I think, Bob, you told me the same thing. When you start reading it, it is hard to put down because you get invested in the people. It's not just okay. Here are the 5 things you need to know how to combat gender equity issues. Here are real people that you're getting engaged with, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I think that other issues and topics that are difficult, like you say, Melanie, to engage with or engage other people about, can be handled in this way. But so you kind of touched on this, but can you expand a little bit about how you populated the people of the novel, those people that were in the that were the protagonist at all in the novel?
Yeah, so I mean, I think all characters are probably a combination of 10 people I knew into one person plus lots of research. So I had gone through it. One thing I wanted to make sure as I was writing the book was that I wasn't just writing about my experience. And it was interesting because I spent essentially several years where I was talking to hundreds of women. Essentially, if someone was sitting next to me on a plane or I was at a conference in the hallway, something like that, I would just start to collect stories. And mainly what I was looking for is personally was kind of validation that what I wasn't imagining bias. It actually was real. I didn't just work for a weird place. It actually was it was everywhere. And so there were just so many patterns. And then the patterns were also in the research. And so I think it was probably this not necessarily a clean process. I read a lot of how to write a novel books, and they spell it out like it's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Maybe that works for some people. For me, it was a few years of things just percolating in the back of my mind where I might have an idea for a character or have an idea for a scene. And sometimes I started with a character. Maybe it was somebody, based on a collection of people I knew, or maybe sometimes it started actually with a scene and I had to create characters for that scene, or it started with a concept and I had to create a scene for that concept and then characters for that. And it was a little bit all over the place, to be honest.
Yeah. Other questions for Melanie from the rest of you all? I don't want to dominate the conversation here.
Melanie, I've got a comment and a question. One of the things, after thinking about your book for long enough for my brain to operate, that I thought that you did that was unique was that you managed to create characters that you cared about both professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. And lots of sort of how to behave in the modern workplace books leave the people that you who are being used as examples as either dead flat, uh, uh, sociopaths or business mad people who are so focused. So the I wondered how you sort of went about doing that. How did you find the balance between people worrying? Well, I won't go into too much detail, but there's a balance between people behaving at work and people with outside lives that I thought was really quite good, and wondered if you'd worried about that.
Yeah, it was actually something that I struggled with a bit, especially with how much to give different characters outside lives, since especially with a lot of the women characters, because I think I didn't want them to just end up getting defined by that, which is what happens to women in the workplace. That if I did a lot on, say, showed some scenes with women and their kids, which I actually don't ever show, there are discussions of some of the women characters who have kids, but we never have scenes with them and their kids, because I thought if I showed that, then that character is going to be defined by that. So I almost was kind of dealing with this fact that I knew that no matter how well intended the reader is, they would come in with biases, and that I kind of had to do things to make sure that those biases didn't get in the way of the lessons that they needed to learn. So that was kind of one of the things that was hard. A lot of what I really tried to focus on was showing their interior lives as much as possible, and just what's going on inside their heads. And I feel like that was something that I didn't see a lot of in the existing business fables, the Patrick Lencioni books and whatnot, that they really just show what's going on with characters and how they're relating to each other. But I felt like what was actually more important that we don't often know is just everybody's dealing with these internal struggles, and that's the thing that's always getting in the way. That even if somebody wants to do the right thing, there's a million reasons in their head, many of them legitimate, that are making it harder to do the right thing. You might want to hire maybe this person to hire is not as good of an idea to hire as this person, but this person's going to take longer to get in seat. And in your head, you're thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to balance that? And actually, do I have the time to onboard them? And just all of these different factors that go on in our heads, and to kind of have empathy for how hard it is to be a leader, and kind of empathy for the system.
Well put.
Other questions, other comments?
Being the female on the call here.
Yeah, where are all our colleagues?
Yeah, really. But thank you, Melanie. And I start thinking, I don't know if I was really, really lucky or really naive, because I honestly can only think of a couple times where I thought, is this a gender thing that is being held against me? And the one administrator at NDSU who I had the biggest conflict with, I don't know if it was because I was naive, but I really think he held it against me, not because I was female, but because I didn't have a PhD and I wasn't from a hard science.
Yeah.
So I mean, he treated my predecessor, male, the same way. So, and when you said, families and everything, maybe we were really lucky in our department, because in fact, I was emailing a couple people from NDSU about the ACE history stuff yesterday, Dave, and without thinking, I just put, oh, and how are your kids doing? And we just did that all the time, whether it was male or female. This was guys I was emailing. So how's the family doing? And, oh, that's great. You're coming back to Fargo to see your son in the show and blah, blah, blah. So again, I don't know if I was really lucky or naive. So is there a way to tell the difference? Was I just not aware, maybe?
I mean, it's hard to know without the
I don't expect you to know, but it's got me thinking now.
I mean, I think that there are probably a number of different things. I mean, I do think some places are just worse than others, is like a definite fact.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there's probably a lot of the different gendered expectations and norms that just are more noticed now than were in the past. And I don't think that's about being naive. I think it's that there was a long time where just getting enough women at the table was kind of the first step. And that having women in senior positions, right, that was the next step. And so one thing I've seen in higher education a lot was that a lot of time was spent getting to, okay, let's get to a point where we have women who are provosts, who are presidents, who are in senior positions.
Mhm.
And the inequities that occur even when that's the case are coming to the forefront now more than they probably were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I was on a panel at the other ACE recently with a group of women presidents, and they talked a lot about just like kind of all the little things. Maybe they were a woman president who talks about how in her system, the board or the system office would call her and ask her if she needs help with the budget, even though she's gone through several really intense, difficult budget things in previous systems that she's led, and that she never call her male colleagues with the same questions. And I think it's all these little things that they don't feel like overt bias, but they're there under the surface. And it's not naivety in terms of not noticing them. It's just that it kind of, I think it's now we're at the more subtle, the more subtle challenges.
And when you talk about, the men as the presidents and provosts and everything, when I became director, the vice president for agriculture was female. The extension director was female. We went to a diversity training with, I think it was North Dakota, South Dakota. I know Missouri was there, some other Midwestern states. And this guy was talking about, male dominated. We went, wait a minute, not North Dakota. Our action happens in the women's restroom, not the men's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I have noticed a difference when I talk to women, especially millennials, some of the Gen Z folks who are in industries like education and healthcare and nonprofits, government. And some of them I think are actually more frustrated than their counterparts in things like engineering or construction or finance that are very male dominated, because they feel like nobody's listening to them, that they see how if they talk about their kids, they feel a little bit judged, like, well, how are you going to balance that? Whereas if the male colleague talks about their kids, there's an automatic, isn't that so great? He's babysitting his kids. Either you're not babysitting your own kids or your kids. And I think that what's coming up a lot now is women in education, healthcare, nonprofits, government, who are saying that just because we actually have more women at the top, there isn't discussion about it. We don't feel like we can discuss it because we feel like we should just be lucky that there's a woman president and there's a woman provost. And when I talk to women in industries like finance and real estate and engineering, there's whole groups. There are groups of men allies who get together and talk about how to support the women. And that doesn't happen in higher ed.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating concept too, the ally concept. I mean, I think those of us who finished up our careers in some form of leadership probably found ourselves being more allies than we knew, or that we even identified as a role that we would have. But when you first started using that term and some of the things that you put out, I found it resonated very well. I actually, the last, this and probably others do too, but the last year I was there, I was looking for innovative projects that the university could fund that would change the direction of the university. And one of the issues that surfaced was the fact that there were so few women in provost roles, but also certainly so few women who moved from provost to president. I mean, if you look at the numbers, since then, there have been some notable exceptions to that who I think are leading very effective moves in that direction. But at the time, and one of the women provosts who I knew was, actively searching for a presidency was a friend of mine from Purdue, and I called her and I said, we're looking for things. Is this should we consider a training program of some sort that might help, in this direction? And, she jumped all over me, which, appropriately so, as I think about it later, but she just said, I don't need any training. It's those people trying to hire us that need training. It's those boards of directors and boards of trustees who, when I walk in and they say, oh, we see that your husband has retired, this is a 24/7 job, right? Who just, because she was a woman, she got completely different. And your concept of allies, I think that's a fascinating concept that doesn't surface unless you identify it, and then you can sign and see, oh yeah, okay, an ally can do this, an ally should do this, and here's a role the ally will play. But for a long time, at least for me, doing that was one thing. Identifying it as a role that you would take on, that was something different.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find in your research anything? Do you find I'm not sure what term I'm looking for here, but did you find that allies were having that similar kind of issue? Maybe they were allies, but they didn't know it, or allies who thought they were but weren't?
I think there's a lot of confusion around what does it mean to be an ally? How is that different from mentoring? How is that different from sponsoring? And I actually have a slide on this somewhere. I could just pull up because I think that allyship applies something that is more active, and that's a lot of what I think a lot of folks think that allyship is really just about the information. And so what I've tried to do is talk to groups about allyship as, let's see. This is from a program I do with the Chronicle. Am I sharing the right thing?
Emotions. I think just in your comparison, as you said it there, coming into this, though, that there's a difference between being an ally and being a mentor or being a sponsor. I think an ally is a stronger role to play than a mentor or sponsor, at least in my mind.
Yeah, so this is kind of how I think about it. The mentor provides advice, they provide guidance, they've got knowledge and experience. The sponsor uses their influence, which is why often they'll say a mentor doesn't have to be at your employer, but a sponsor, it's easier if they don't have to be. They could be using their influence in the professional association or to get your next job, but usually they have influence for exposure networks and opportunities. And then an ally understands the biases and obstacles. They recognize their own biases, maybe their own privileges. If they see something, they say something, they're a bystander. If they see bias happening, they don't just afterwards sympathize with you, but they might figure out how to address it, and then they're advocating for change. And I think even the understanding the biases and obstacles specifically, to me, that's a big difference. I have a comic somewhere on, let's see, where's my motherhood penalty one? Let me see all my slides. In this one. Yeah, so this is one I use a lot. We've got the father on the left giving a speech. Hey, everyone, I'm a little tired. I have a 5-month-old at home. And you can kind of envision the collective in the room. And what a lot of the research will show is that a new father is seen as a good candidate for big projects, promotions, because they're not going to leave. They need the money. And he's such an involved dad. He took yesterday to go to a PTA meeting. There's research on just having PTA on the resume and how that helps men. And it actually hurts women. So on the right side, she knows that if she opens her talk with discussing her kids, she'll be judged, clearly not in every circumstance, but in many of them. heard she just had a new baby. She might scale back. Not good for that big project that's going on in people's heads. Often with a woman's second child, that goes in people's heads even more. She missed the PTA meeting yesterday. She's clearly overcommitted. And that one I went back and forth on with a few friends. Should she go to the PTA meeting? Should she miss the PTA meeting? And I'm not a mother. A lot of my friends who are said, yeah, it actually doesn't matter what you put there. It doesn't matter if she misses the PTA meeting or she goes to the PTA meeting. Either way, she's going to be overcommitted. And part of the reason that my inspiration for making that comic was a young mother on the team at my job who one of her mentors was a guy who started every speech he gave talking about his kids and how sleepy he was. I'm so tired. I haven't slept in several nights. And the room ate it up. They loved it. And he told her she should do the same thing. And she came to me, she said, I don't think I should do that, right? No, don't do that. But that is not all of, but that is kind of one of the, even just a very small difference between mentorship and allyship, that the mentor is just passing along advice based on what they've experienced. And the ally realizes that her experience as a woman, in this case, a woman of color, her experience is going to be very different. And I think allyship means a few things. One, giving different advice. And then going beyond that, okay, if he's in performance reviews and notices people talking about her differently than talking about a man, is he stepping in and saying something in those performance reviews? And then the next step of allyship would be saying, okay, well, also let's look at our policies. Do we have, what does paternal leave look like? Things like that.
These are great examples you're sharing, Melanie, and I really appreciate it. What I've been thinking about is some of the best training I've ever been to was about implicit bias.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get political, but it scares me if we can't have trainings like that in the future and some of the things you're talking about. I mean, is it going to be verboten to even talk about these issues? Because it's
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of states it essentially is.
What? You're not booked in Florida now, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, people ask me that. Is this going to affect you? I was like, I'm not booking in Florida.
Other questions for Melanie? Go ahead, Becky.
No, I was just going to say, so the wonderful work you're doing, it just isn't going to benefit a lot of people because they won't have the opportunity for your workshops and things like that. And like I said, that implicit bias training was some of the best I ever had, and it really made me think.
Yeah,
Melanie,
Go ahead. No,
go ahead.
It's scary. That's all I can say.
How successful? How are you distributing your comics, and how successful is your transition from where you were creating the book to creating the comics? I see you use the comics obviously in your workshops and things like that, but where's your distribution beyond that, and how successful do you think that is?
It's primarily word of mouth and people finding me. To be honest, I'm not sure how. Sometimes search engine optimization is a mystery to me. People find me through, I don't know how they found me. I post on social media. I don't have a huge following. I think it's hard. It's both a good time and a not good time to be an individual content creator. There's all these channels out there. You can just put stuff up. That's great. It is very hard now with the algorithms, that even on LinkedIn, which used to be the one where you would largely see people in your network, has become about, unless you've got tens of thousands of followers, it's pretty hard to get anything out that way. So I think for me, most of my audience is people sending my comics to the other hard thing about the kind of thing I do is that people are afraid to like it even on LinkedIn because they don't want their bosses to see. So I've had a number of, I identified with that comic so much, but I couldn't like it on LinkedIn, or I couldn't share it on LinkedIn.
No, it's fascinating. Part of me just wants to sort of hold my nose when people start talking about social media and all of the claptrap that's been going on. But your perspective about a content developer and provider in that environment is something I just would not have run into unless you'd said that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, get ready though, Melanie, because after your big stage at Comic-Con, you're gonna blow up.
Yeah. My one of many panels competing with all the superhero panels.
There you go.
Good.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of winding down a little bit here, but I did want to reserve a couple of minutes. I mentioned to Melanie that, that those of us who are on here, have our background tends to be kind of not only dealing with the topic that she's dealing with, but also the process, of moving information in a certain fashion. But right now we're all kind of intrigued and facing a new environment. And one of the fascinating conversations I had with Melanie, where we get kind of discussing this, was that she uses Chat GPT as an assistant in her efforts. As a, am I phrasing that right, Melanie? Is that?
I mean, I think assistant is almost, I feel like, not giving enough credit to ChatGPT, because sometimes I feel like it's an assistant and sometimes I feel like it's a peer. I mean,
Well, would you just give us a little back? I mean, because we're all facing this. Tom, you were there. I was at the ACE annual conference in North Carolina a month ago now, I guess. And that one of the speakers was talking about how to communicate with across different generational lines. So how does a baby boomer communicate with a millennial, et cetera, which was not actually new information, I thought, but I asked her a question about, I said, okay, so now you're helping us understand how a millennial might communicate with a Gen Z, with an X, with a baby boomer, with a silent generation, how do we all now understand, how do we communicate with the entire body of information out there when that entire body of information is talking to us?
Yeah.
As a person, and that's kind of what you said, that they're a peer to a certain extent.
Mhm.
So give us a little background on how you use it and your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I have a half-formed blog about this. At some point I'll finish. I think of it as how I would communicate with a person, and that's exactly it. And I think that's the trick that a lot of people miss. And a lot of the big influencers around prompt engineering will say that even things like saying hello and thank you and goodbye, that doesn't impact the machine, but it tells your brain to treat the machine like a person, and then you will actually get better results from it. And when I was at EAB, I had a team of 100 people. So if I needed anything, I could go to a person just out of college. I could go to somebody with equivalent professional experience or even more years than I had. And they were there in a second. And when I transitioned to being a solopreneur, I would use contract folks here and there if I had a big project or something to get done, but it wasn't the same as having that consistent group of colleagues. And I really miss that. And having Chat GPT to me has been amazing because it has in so many ways replicated what I was able to get from people, which sounds terrible to say. And I can talk about, there's some things it can't do as well as people yet, but so I think of it as just different levels. The things I would have had an entry level person do might be proofread, for example. So I can have it proofread. I can have it do quick research on the question. You have to tell it to only give you real sources because it may make stuff up. That's a problem.
Don't make this up.
But it will give you real sources if you tell it to. But sometimes the 22-year-old analyst also made stuff up. But that's at first I was using it very much as an entry level assistant. Edit this, some quick research. And then I started using it, I'd say kind of as a 3 to 5 years of work experience. Hey, I'm leading a workshop on this topic. What are some different ways I could approach it? And it might give me a few sample agendas. out detailed hour by hour sample agendas, and they were good. I mean, they weren't exactly what I would do because I feel like I want to bring my own take to them. But honestly, how much of that is my ego? I don't know. But could I have just used possibly? When I then I started, probably next level above that was using it really as a writing specialist almost. And if I just ask it to write a blog on a topic, I won't like it. If I give it samples that I've written, and then I give it a bunch of notes and say, turn these notes into an email, an article, blog that matches my style, it's pretty good. Actually, I did a piece for Evolution. I don't ever know how to say that. That was pretty much written. It's not the best piece I ever did. I'm not proud of this. I don't love this piece of writing, but I wanted to do a piece for Evolution on what I'd experienced as a lifelong learner since I left my job, and having been someone that consulted with online ed leaders, and now taking my own journey of lifelong learning, kind of what I've experienced, different providers I've tapped into. And I had a bunch of notes, and I just needed it to be put into paragraphs. And I asked a friend after that, a former colleague who I worked closely with, I think, could you tell that was different from my usual writing style? And she said, I wouldn't have guessed it was ChatGPT. It definitely was not as, I forgot which, is like not as funny as you, or some of the sentences were shorter, but maybe it was a good thing. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I don't use it a lot for writing, but I will use it for proposals. If I have to do a proposal for, a client, I will put in past proposals that I've written. Here's a past proposal. Here's the client email asking for a proposal. Here's some notes on the conversation we had. Turn it into some. I'm still going back and forth. So I think of it as it's as if I had a pretty competent team member, and I'm still going back and forth with them, but it's taking me 3 hours instead of 8. And then the thing I've been most impressed with lately is using it as a thought partner. And so the next book that I want to write, I haven't decided if it's a book or a series of comics, is on just how racial bias works. And I have some ideas from psychology that I want to use. And I just sometimes I dictate them and then paste them in. Or dictate onto the computer. I'll just, hey, here's some ideas. Here's what I'm thinking about. Or I put in, actually, I had written a 25-minute TV pilot idea. And then I realized when I was done, I didn't want this to be a TV pilot. I wanted it to be a graphic novel. So I gave ChatGPT the TV pilot. And then I said, ask me 20 questions that will help me think about how to turn this into a novel. So it asked me 20 questions. And then I start to just reply to each one. Okay, here are some of my thoughts. Ask me more questions. It'll ask me more questions. And then it might say, oh, I think that you need to build up this idea. And then I might say, oh, yeah, you're right, I do. So we're going back and forth. And I've, in the past, paid book coaches a fair amount of money to do this same task. It's pulling ideas out of me. I think the thing that it can't, so it's instantaneous. It doesn't have hurt feelings. The thing it can't do is no. I think with some of the colleagues I had the closest relationships with, they would say to me, I can tell from the tenor of your voice that you're more excited about this idea than this idea. And it can't do that yet. But I'm sure it will be able to in a few months. Anyway, that's, I
just wanted to.
You see a time when we, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Bob.
No.
I was just saying that's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
That's basically what I was going to say. Is there a time when we don't need human writers anymore and editors?
We need fewer. Yeah. I mean, the writer's strike in Hollywood right now, I feel bad for those writers, right? You don't need as many writers in a writer's room. I think you still need some writers in the writer's room because it doesn't have it doesn't have the same kind of judgment. There's a great series by NPR's podcast, Planet Money. Look for their 3-series episode on AI. So the first one they do, they have ChatGPT write a Planet Money episode for them. And then the second one, they work with an AI company to develop an artificial voice for one of their previous hosts. And then the third episode is where they play for you the Planet Money episode they developed, where Planet Money did everything, wrote the script, decided who they would interview, wrote the interview questions. The real people used the interview questions on the experts. The episode was on the automation of phone operators. And then they gave ChatGPT the transcripts of their interviews with the excerpts. It picked what quotes to use. They told it to make the episode more fun. It wrote a radio play about this topic. And the episode is then delivered with one of their live hosts talking to the AI voice that they made, just reading the script. And I think at the end of it, they concluded, okay, this is not as good as a Planet Money episode, but we're still pretty early. And it's probably still better than most of the podcast episodes out there in the podcast universe.
This is the, I wanted to bring this up because all of us here have been in positions where if we look at what you're talking about now, we can immediately see how it plugs into where we were.
Yeah.
And how life would be dramatically different in all of our offices, in all of our units, were we at this point in time. I'll ask all the rest of you, is that an overstatement?
Not a bit.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you played around with the image capabilities of just now image, what Photoshop can do now.
Mm-hmm.
AI, what Midjourney can do.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah.
Did you all see in one of the ACE forums, I think it was, that the University of Florida has guidelines or policy, I don't know what you want to call it, about writing? I think it was more than just extension publications, but writing with AI support, basically. I thought, whoa, that's interesting.
Yeah. Did you read them? I got in about halfway through and I thought, yeah, this is, yeah, okay. I mean, it's all stuff. It's very common sense, but I think people get are worried about what common sense is now these days.
It's not what it used to be.
Right. So, well, any final questions for Melanie? End of our hour here. Well, Melanie, I appreciate once again you stepping up and joining us. I'm sorry we didn't have more people, but we will definitely push the recording of this off to them when they come back to me and said, "Hey, I couldn't log on." Well, tough luck.
Their loss.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But so best of luck to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. It's always fascinating to chat with you, and I have a great time, introducing you to my colleagues too. So there we go.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to meet all of you, and please keep in touch. You can, my website's right there under my face, so feel free to get in touch. Find me on whatever social medias you're on, and
Right.
look forward to staying in touch.
And I
Thanks
would
so much,
highly
Melanie.
recommend Beyond Leaning In. It'll one long plane ride and you'll be done with it.
There's also an audiobook if that's your preference.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, next thing we know, ChatGPT will be reading it to us.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I know that you're not ChatGPT, Dave.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a really good question.
There you go.
And then eventually ChatGPT will be reading it and not being willing to share it with us.
Yeah. You don't
Only if
deserve
we're
to hear
good.
this. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for joining us. We'll be on with something else in 3 or 4 months, and and thank you again, Melanie.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Melanie.
Bye.
And thanks, Dave,
Bye.
for setting this up.
Hey,
Yes.
no problem. Yeah.